Grain shape, size distribution, bond area, and packing density decide whether a column stands on paper or in wind. We treated sand like a uniform commodity scattered across a map. It's a set of microgeometries bound to place. Treat that truth as nuisance, and the field crews inherit it as failure. Treat it as design, and you buy time. Meanwhile, where physics meets profit without oversight, something else shows up in the dark: pumps, skiffs, bribes, and threats. That's where we're heading next. The Sand Mafias: crime, corruption, and disappearing coasts. Night on the river doesn't look like crime at first. It looks like work. A skiff idles with its lights killed. A diesel pump coughs, then steadies. A flexible hose snakes down into black water, and slurry climbs sand, silt, and someone else's shoreline into waiting trucks. A boy posted on the road taps a horn twice when a patrol's headlights crest the hill. The crew cuts the engine, smokes in silence, and waits for darkness to thicken. Then the pump starts again. Where permits cap volumes, margins bloom after midnight. In parts of India, the term Sand Mafia stopped being colorful language years ago. District officers who tried to seize pumps were run off roads. Reporters following truck convoys received threats, then funerals. Fishermen who complained about banks collapsing found their nets cut and their tires slashed. The money is simple arithmetic. A riverbed is an open pit without guards, haul roads, or royalties, and a city's appetite converts grains into cash before dawn. Permits exist, but practice eats paper. A legal leaseholder takes the daylight quota, then subcontracts the river to crews who mine beyond the line. Receipts show small volumes, yards fill with mountains. A local official skims from each load to keep phones quiet. The road inspector waves trucks through because his cousin S in the convoy. Governance doesn't vanish. It adapts, framing extraction as livelihood, while the channel drops by inches that add up to meters. Violence is the enforcement that fills the gap left by law. A young constable stands on a bridge and films a barge. A week later, his supervisor transfers him to a desk. A village head who organized a petition wakes to find a warning carved into his door. The message is always the same: this river belongs to us until the water says otherwise. When arrests do land, they catch drivers, not owners. The pump's legal. The hose is a tool. The load was just there. Meanwhile, coastal cities order their expansion on schedule. Sand doesn't keep. Singapore's land growth turned importing into policy. When neighboring countries tightened or banned exports after islands eroded and villages reported vanished fishing grounds, the market shifted into blind spots. New brokers, new routes, barges registered under fresh flags. Official figures lagged the reality. Islets that once anchored maritime boundaries simply disappeared. A fisherman pointed to a patch of open water and named the trees you could see from there in the 199s. The map didn't argue, it updated. Prestige projects amplified the signal. Dubai drew signature archipelagos into the Gulf with borrowed sediment, then learned storms love edges. Reclamation sand compacted, subsided, and needed constant tending. The supply chain that fed the shapes reached into other coasts, where villagers woke to murkier shallows and channels that ran like veins cut too deep. When a minister asked for the source, a contractor handed him a contract and a shrug. The geometry looked like wealth. The ledger read borrowed time. On the Mekong, illegal crews work between legal dredgers that wear compliance like a vest. A cutter suction pontoon with papers shows face. A cluster of skiffs without names hugs a bend after dusk. The bed lowers, gradients steepen, and salt rides farther inland, turning taps metallic and fields brackish. A district health officer notes a rise in hypertension and chalks it up to diet. The river knows the cause. It's the absence under the keel. Why does this persist? Because construction budgets are immediate and river collapse is cumulative. A developer needs fill by Monday. A mayor wants ribbon and cameras before elections. A port authority can't slip a tender again without penalties. Each one makes a phone call to a broker who knows a crew who knows a quiet bend. Everyone believes they're taking a cup from a lake. Together, they lower the floor. There's also a revenue addiction. Local governments levy fees on legal loads. Those fees fund road repairs and clinics. Crack down too hard and the official tonnage drops. The budget bleeds. Meanwhile, the illegal stream keeps moving because buyers care about delivery, not provenance. Compliance becomes a competitive disadvantage. The honest quarry quotes a timeline. The night crew quotes a price. The story travels by rumor and obituary. A journalist in Uttar Pradesh reported on a syndicate and died in a staged crash. A young activist in Tamil Nadu filmed trucks near a protected river and never came home. Their names flicker through police reports and court filings. The river carries them anyway, folding each loss into the low thrum of diesel and the hiss of slurry through hose. While that was happening in India's districts, an Indonesian Coast Guard patrol traced a dredger's AIS signal to a patch of sea where no one had a permit. The captain produced papers from a different jurisdiction. The patrol photographed a deck lined with sand like a wheat barge and sailed home with a report. A month later, the company changed names. The barge kept sailing. The disappearing coast is not a metaphor. In Cambodia and Vietnam, mining pits invisible from shore create waves that bite harder, currents that shoulder into banks at angles, and storm surges that run farther on flatter beds. Houses step back by meters each rainy season. Governments issue relocation grants measured in months. Families measure loss in trees, grave, and the distance to the new ferry landing. Here's the hardest truth. As long as we build the way we build and price what we build by calendar, the black market will feel like a solution. Enforcement can raise risks. Bans can push boats farther, make loads smaller, increase costs. But the only pressure that holds is reducing demand, tightening legal supply with real-time tracking, and making recycled and crushed alternatives cheaper where they stand. Until then, the night pump will sound like progress to the man holding the hose, and like collapse to the man standing on a falling bank. Ports, reclamation, and the vanishing island. Start with a city that manufactures land the way others pour sidewalks. Singapore learned to grow by eating the sea, parcel by parcel. For decades, barges lined up like patient ants, tipping sand into curtains of geotextile and rock. Shorelines straightened. New runways appeared where tides used to turn. The volumes were staggering, hundreds of millions of tons pulled from somewhere else's storm buffer. When neighbors watched their beaches thin and islets shrink, export bans clicked on. Indonesia, then Malaysia, then Cambodia and Vietnam. The AIS tracks didn't stop, they bent. Dredgers sailed farther, changed flags, and offloaded at night. On satellite images, specks that once anchored fishing grounds simply vanished. A fisherman steered his skiff to a set of coordinates and cut the motor over open water, pointing at nothing and naming the trees that used to catch wind there. That geometry had a ledger. Each reclaimed hectare was a warranty claim against a region's sediment budget. Currents resorted what remained. Waves bit higher. Storms found the new edges and tested them. Reclamation sand compacts. It needs tending, drains, and stone. Engineers understand that. The bill is time and money. The hidden cost is born afield, where a small island's disappearance redraws a maritime boundary and a village shifts its boats to deeper water they cannot afford. Meanwhile, in the Gulf, prestige drew maps with dredgers. Dubai's Palm and World Archipelagos rose as marketing that could be seen from orbit. The supply chain that fed their outlines tugged at submerged shoals and far coasts. When storms arrived, they read the geometry like a welcome mat. Nourishment campaigns rolled in behind, importing ever more sand to keep the brochures true. Doha carved harbors and platforms out of shallows for stadiums, free zones, and towers, and learned the same lesson. The first pour is cheaper than the second, because the second pays for the sea's opinion. Ports have their own appetite and their own clock. Containers don't negotiate, they berth or they wait. Reclamation builds terminals the sea didn't intend, long quays in flat water, yards that need plateaus where there were none. Each project hunts bulk fill with a schedule attached. If the inland quarry can't deliver, the dredge becomes procurement and construction at once. Cutter suction heads bite a channel deeper, then swing to feed a pad. On blueprints, the arrows are tidy. In water, each swing lowers the bed, steepens the gradient, and alters the tide's reach. Pilots adjust. Insurance notices. The next storm swells 1 centimeter higher over a kilometer more of flat. Engineering makes this all feel normal. Silt curtains, turbidity monitors, fish screens, settlement ponds, each one helps. But combine them with a market that moves faster than permits and you get another pattern. When a region tightens the rules, a broker proposes an alternative. Offshore maintenance dredge with generous definitions, a transshipment point outside territorial waters, a document that lists origin, multiple. Compliance teams read PDFs. Barge decks count grains. The port ribbon cuts on time. Insurance names the risk without poetry. Engineered shorelines settle, subside, and sometimes liquefy if shaken before they finish binding. Sea level rise lays a ruler over their lifespan. Add subsidence from groundwater draw, the compaction of new fill, and the lower bed from nearby mining, and your elevation margin narrows like a road at dusk. Underwriters price it into premiums and exclusions, overtopping limits, storm windows, surge models that look at channel depth as hard as they look at wind speed. A port director reads those terms and adds ballast to concrete at the budget line. There's a military edge to this, quiet and decisive. Runways lengthened on constructed land, deep berths for naval hulls, fuel depots tucked into reclaimed corners, each needs sand. National security becomes logistics. Your supply of fill controls your timeline. If a neighbor's ban holds, projects slip from quarter to year. If a clandestine supplier fails a headline test, a contract dissolves and a diplomat clears their throat. Maritime strategy inherits a dredger's schedule and a customs code that says little. Storms right afterwards nobody wants to read aloud. In Hong Kong's typhoon seasons, reclaimed platforms took waves that bent fences horizontal and sent spray over container stacks. In Busan and Shanghai, terminals rode out cyclones with yard cranes locked and stacks strapped, then reopened to find silt fingerprints inside channels just deep enough yesterday. Where estuaries have been mined upstream, surge climbs farther, and the line between safe harbor and flat floodplain blurs a little more each year. Unknown to them, across the reclaimed edge, island communities treat vanishing as a daily verb. A family in Rairu walks to a shoreline their grandparents remember as 3 trees deep. The path ends in water. A school that sat a safe 10 meters from spring tides now needs a step to enter on full moons. A young man joins a sand crew because the boats don't return heavy anymore, sending money home to buy a new well farther inland on an island that is smaller this year than last. Ports will keep building, trade insists. The question is what they build with and who pays when they do. Recycled fill works on land if logistics cooperate. Crushed rock compacts into platforms that don't slump as much as loose sand. Circular depots near cities can feed pad layers, while high-spec dredging is reserved for navigation, not export. Procurement can write end buyer liability into contracts, prove origin, or lose the bid. Satellite monitoring can flag suspicious pits and sudden shoal shifts. AIS transparency can make a barge's route a statement, not a rumor. But here's the line that won't move. Every hectare you add into the sea subtracts from a ledger someone else reads as safety. The vanishing island isn't drama, it's a receipt. And the next time a ribbon cuts on a seawall straight as a ruler, listen for the missing word in the speech. The speaker will thank lenders, builders, and ministers. The river, the delta, and the village that lost its ground won't be named. The water will remember anyway. Choke points of extraction, rivers, deltas, and the seabed. While that seawall ribbon was cutting, the Mekong was teaching a harder class. Lower the bed with years of dredging, and the river stops behaving like a river you remember. Gradients steepen, currents sharpen, and the dry season opens a door the sea has been testing for decades. Salinity noses inland through a deeper channel, picking up speed on that new slope. In the Vietnamese delta, farmers who measured planting by the taste of ditch water now carry cheap meters and watch numbers creep. Rice paddies flip to shrimp ponds because the river won't sweeten on schedule. It isn't a market whim, it's a bed 5 meters lower than it was when their fathers stacked sacks to the ferry. Upstream, boats run lighter over new shoals. A pilot who once threaded a bend by memory now watches sonar because the Talveg has migrated toward a bank that wasn't there. Ferry ramps hang in air, fixed to banks that walked away. A local official points at a survey stake and says a word nobody in the room wanted to hear out loud: incision. What nobody knew at the time was how that word multiplies. Incision strips floodplains of the pulse that keeps them alive. Fish that bred in shallows don't find shallows. Sediment that built islands in the estuary loses its ride. While that was happening on the Mekong, China's Pearl River Delta and the Yangtze estuary were writing their own ledgers. Extraction for concrete and fill, combined with subsidence from groundwater draw and sheer weight of cities, pulled land down while channels deepened. Typhoon seasons learned the new path of least resistance. Storm surge climbed faster up incised conduits, sloshing over seawalls designed for another baseline. Port authorities added dredge campaigns just to keep drafts, and discovered the carve they commissioned became the ramp their next storm used to get inside the door. Unknown to them, across the continent, the Nile's constraints turned into negotiations no spreadsheet could settle. Upstream dams recalibrated the hydrograph. Downstream hunger for aggregate chased the only easy source. Take from the bed and Alexandria feels it on a storm day. Delta retreat isn't only sea level rise, it's sediment starvation with a lowered floor. Fishermen who once sheltered behind shoals watch the shoals melt, then steer into whether they can't afford to outrun. Cairo pours towers. Rosetta measures line losses in meters of land. In the United States, the Mississippi chapters the same debate in a tidy legal font. Aggregate is regulated, reclamation plans live on file, and habitat restoration can veto a convenient pit. But the tension is real. Navigation wants a straighter, deeper river. Fisheries and wetlands want complexity and sediment. A dredge that keeps a channel open can starve a marsh if the spoils don't land right. Engineers juggle sills, diversions, and beneficial use sites like a cook with too many pots and one stove. It works, often. It doesn't scale to a world sprinting for fill. Trade policy makes it worse by hiding the ingredient inside a vague line item. Customs codes lump sand and gravel into a catch-all that travels without an origin story. A barge leaves a river with a paper trail that says bulk aggregate and a destination that reads expansion phase 2. When borders tighten, cargoes rebrand. When neighbors complain, shipments shift at night to a lighter draft port, and the paperwork reappears downstream as maintenance material. Demand is offshored as language. This is the moment finance discovers sand and decides it's late to the file. Banks underwriting megaprojects start asking where fill originates. Builders produce compliance binders. Satellite analysts sell services that can spot pits growing along rivers not listed in permits. A few insurers tie premiums to provenance. The sector learns, awkwardly, that aggregate comes with reputational risk. But the questions land narrowly, transaction by transaction, while the delta reads the sum, not the invoice. Meanwhile, the seabed turns into the next promised source. Offshore deposits look clean, abundant, and out of sight. A dredger can vacuum vast volumes without a truck, a gate, or a neighbor. The physics says otherwise. Hit a shelf and you change wave patterns, carve a hole and you create a trap for finer silts, disturb benthic habitat and you erase nurseries for species that won't bill you. Shorelines down current feel the subtraction. Nourishment programs import more sand to cover a loss you just moved offshore. The circle completes and calls itself management. Everything was about to change when one port paired dredge windows with storm calendars, missed an extraction slot, and learned a supply chain is a season, not a truck. The fix wasn't heroic. It was a list. Extraction caps tied to bed surveys, salinity triggers that pause pumping, real-time AIS on dredges, public dashboards that turn maintenance from a euphemism into a route. Contracts added end buyer liability and provenance audits that actually visited a bend at dusk. It didn't stop mining. It made absence visible before the bank fell. Here's where it gets interesting. These choke points aren't failures of sand. They're failures of how we treat rivers, deltas, and seabeds as warehouses, not systems. The Mekong needs its floor to keep salt at the door. The Pearl and Yangtze need friction to blunt surge. The Nile's delta needs silt and time, not just concrete and prayer. The Mississippi needs dredging and diversion held in the same plan. Offshore needs a map of no-go zones drawn by waves and fish, not only by bathymetry. Without that, every barge that leaves a bend takes more than grains. It takes options. Financialized geography, the aggregate index nobody tracks. While that bend in the Mekong was cutting deeper, spreadsheets in distant cities learned a new language. Construction schedules didn't slip because cement was late or cranes failed. They slipped because a quarry permit stalled, a barge window closed, a storm clipped a dredge. Somewhere between a pit and a pour, money discovered sand, and it didn't like what it found. An essential input with no index, no futures curve most people trust, and a geography that can't be diversified by wish. Developers felt it first. Their contracts talk in days and damages. Miss a milestone and liquidated damages tick per hour, per crane, per skipped pour. The delay clause doesn't care if the aggregate barge hit a new silt bar or if a province tightened river limits after a bank fell. A project finance model built on tidy lead times inherits the river's mood, and suddenly force majeure learns a new phrase, extraction moratorium. In boardrooms, lenders started penciling risk to something they couldn't price. Cement lines are public, kiln output is countable. Aggregate is 1,000 pits, leases and skiffs moving under customs code that lumps sand and gravel like it's flour. Banks asked origin in diligence calls. Builders passed along compliance binders. The truth remained off-stage. Availability is local, seasonal, and political. A typhoon season lands late. A court halts a channel. An export ban ripples. And a metropolitan bond schedule eats interest while waiting on grains. Municipal debt learned the same lesson in concrete. Cities borrowing for bridges, water plants, sea defenses wrote timetables into bond prospectuses. When aggregate rationing hit, cost escalators kicked, change orders multiplied, auditors called, and ratings agencies asked about materials exposure. It sounded absurd until someone showed the calendar that hinged on an upland quarry and a single haul route through a village that had just voted different. The project still makes sense. The timeline doesn't, and interest doesn't forgive. Private equity treated quarries like any other roll-up, fragmented market, steady demand, local moats. It worked until antitrust and communities pushed back. Consolidation promised efficiency, neighbors heard truck counts and detonations. Courts demanded mitigations, costs rose. A permit slipped a fiscal quarter, and a portfolio company tripped a covenant. Every blasting plan now sits beside a stakeholder map and a litigation budget. Meanwhile, commodity desks peered in. Could sand trade like fuel or ore? Some tried pilots, provenance tracking, standardized grades, port stockpiles. It helps in ports that sit on rock and have rail. It doesn't help where the right sand is a river's gift and a season's bargain. Try warehousing monsoon. Technology's demand curve pours fuel on all of this. Data centers want pads and pads want fill. Transmission lines want footings. EV factories want slab acres and fast access. Every climate bill that accelerates clean energy adds concrete, rebar, and aggregate to the near-term shopping list. Circular supply helps, but the front-loaded build-out pushes demand into the very windows rivers and quarries struggle to meet. A green timeline meets a gray bottleneck. Insurers don't negotiate with hope. Delay in startup coverage, builders risk, business interruption, premiums and exclusions shifted once underwriters added aggregate supply interruption to events that can cascade costs. Prove your source, show your contingency, and map your extraction windows to storm seasons, they said. A port expansion learned that the hard way. When a dredge misread a swell, lost a week, and reclamation fills slipped, the insurer paid and wrote a rider for the next policy that priced the tide. Unknown to them, across an ocean, a CFO slid a new line into contracts, delivery windows defined by extraction and navigation triggers, not just calendar dates. Customers balked, then signed after their own lawyers realized clawbacks were cheaper than lawsuits. A clause on page 37 became the gasket between physics and finance. Markets sniffed an index and found a mesh. No single price captures the right sand in the right place. What emerged instead were proxies, contractor backlogs, cement spreads to rebar, regional freight rates for bulk, and quietly, nightlights on known river reaches. Traders watched AIS pings on dredges, customs data through narrow ports, and satellite speckle where channels shouldn't move. 1,000 tiny signals stitched a map of absence into a number only a few desks could read. Communities noticed they'd become a footnote in someone else's risk memo. A village that blocked trucks to keep a school's walls from cracking learned it had moved a foreign pension fund's returns by basis points. A harbor that enforced a no-night dredging rule for dolphins and fishermen delayed a mega-terminal and lit up a sovereign wealth fund's call sheet. Legitimacy became collateral. Projects with transparent sources, recycled content, and enforceable extraction caps borrowed cheaper. It wasn't philanthropy, it was math. Fewer headlines, fewer pauses, smoother cash flow. Here's where it gets interesting. Finance can slow a shovel faster than a protest sign if terms require it. In buyer liability and live provenance audits make brokers choose between margin and jail. Bond covenants tied to riverbed surveys ratchet flow automatically. Insurers discount projects that publish pit-to-pour dashboards. A quarry with community equity and a reclamation track record beats a cheaper permit with nightly videos on phones. Money doesn't grow scruples, it prices them. But finance is also late and narrow. It likes deals, not deltas. It reads contracts, not currents. The index nobody tracks isn't just price. It's risk compounded by maps, seasons, and law. Until we treat aggregate like the system it is, every schedule will keep discovering geography the hard way when a crane swings over an empty pad and a banker asks why sand didn't show. The technology gambit: can innovation buy time? Here's where things get interesting. Engineers hate unsolved constraints, so they built a kit. Start with the obvious: recycled aggregates. Demolition once meant rubble to landfill. Now crushers break slabs to graded RCA, magnets pull rebar, washers knock dust down, and mobile plants set up inside city limits. That cuts haul miles and delivers base course, sub-base, and even selected structural grades when specs allow. It works best where demolition is steady, sorting is strict, and plants sit within 30 kilometers of new sites. The catch is contamination. Chlorides, gypsum, and stray polymers show up in unpredictable ways.